You are listening to the We Are West Ham podcast, Opposition View with me, Will Pugh, and I'm delighted to say joining us, looking ahead to Sunday's game at London Stadium in the Premier League against Crystal Palace is sports journalist with The Athletic, Max Matthews. Maxie, great to have you on the podcast once again. The Palace-West Ham game, always a bit of a peculiar one. I always enjoy our conversations. You're Palace mad, you know your stuff about football, of course, and I never really know how I feel going into the games against Palace. I always think that, we just had Burnley. I always think you're a good addition to the Premier League. I like Palace being in the Premier League. I like the ground. And I always sort of have this weird sense of confidence, but also at the same time, the exact same amount of fear that we're going to lose 3-0. I don't really know what I can put that down to. But what's your thoughts when you see West Ham looming on the fixture list? How do you tend to feel?
This isn't a result of West Ham's kind of quality as a team or anything, but I always feel a little bit optimistic just in terms of we tend to have got the better review in recent years in a lot of tight games. We've had last minute winners and penalties and that kind of thing. And so just based on the fact that we seem to be somewhat of a bogey team, at least in, the last 5 years, we seem to have had our fair share of results. And so probably slight optimism, but that is not the case going into this weekend, as I'm sure we'll discuss.
Yeah, we will discuss that indeed. It's an interesting one, isn't it? Because now Manuel Lanzini's left West Ham, who scored, I think, 97.9% of his West Ham goals against Crystal Palace.
Always screamers as well somehow.
Yeah, never less than a 9 out of 10 quality. The one he scored at Selhurst Park, where he sort of controlled it with his right and smashed it in with his left in the same movement. Genuinely one of the greatest goals. Yeah, so I was very sad to see him go, not just for his goals against Palace, but, just generally. I mean, in history, West Ham's record against Crystal Palace is 125, drawn 23, lost 18. So we've got a slight edge over you, going back to our first ever game in 1906, which weirdly I don't quite remember. But as you mentioned, I think in the last sort of, we've only had out of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In the last 9 games we've played against you, we've won just twice, lost 4 of them, and the rest have been draws. So it does feel like you have the upper hand. Do you put that down to anything particular? I think every team has that in the league, don't they? There's like, even when we play Villa, even though they're good, I always sort of seem to be confident because we always tend to beat them. Conversely, whenever we play Everton, I just, no matter how good or bad they are or how good or bad we are, I'm sorry, well, that's a defeat because we always lose to Everton. What do you put that recent success of Palace's against West Ham down to?
That's a good question. Because
it really was, wasn't it?
Yeah. I don't know. I think maybe the fact that not that West Ham play rubbish football under David Moyes. You don't win the Europa Conference League playing absolutely terrible football, but maybe just the sense that they play a bit more in a kind of direct way. Maybe that's being unfair to Moyes ball. But I think just the fact that, I don't know, West Ham, their kind of style of play under Moyes seems to just match up quite nicely to Palace.
Yeah, no, I quite agree. I think it's one of those where, because David Moyes is typically happy to let other teams have the ball, when we come up against teams, not that this is how you were under Vieira particularly, but when we come up against teams who are also not that bothered about having the ball, that tends to be when we come unstuck, when we play teams who play the same way as we do, almost. But look, we'll go into, obviously there's some team news sort of creeping out yesterday and today, Palace-wise, with some injuries to Czech Decore and Eberezer. Looks like he could be out for a couple of weeks. Decore potentially the whole season. We'll get onto that in a minute. But how are you sort of feeling at the moment? Obviously, the Patrick Vieira era came to an end. Hodgson came back, and at the end of last season, you were playing like 1970s Brazil for a few weeks. I think, just you'll forgive me, just your stats alone this season in the Premier League. I think you're like you've got the sort of fourth lowest goals for tally, and also like the fourth or fifth best defensive record as well. It might be, for outsiders, it might be fair to say you've kind of reverted to type under Hodgson. What did you make of the whole managerial situation, and then how are you finding it this year? Season?
Yeah, I was slightly against the decision to sack Vieira because in a lot of the games that we had lost, we played really well and just come out on the end of like a 1-goal defeat. Like against Man City, we were 0-0, deservedly 0-0 until like the 83rd minute or something, and then Elise just gives away a stupid penalty and we lose 1-0. But like Vieira's coached 0-0 against City. And 3 or 4 other examples like that where we could have easily got the results, but maybe didn't have the luck or that real clinical edge. And we had he had a really difficult run of fixtures before he got sacked, and then a much easier run of fixtures after he eventually got sacked. But I do understand it, and I suppose the fact that we really picked up under Hodgson, which is sort of mitigated by the fact that we had the much easier fixtures.
Yeah,
it was potentially the right call. And basically, based on how we played last season, which was a real antithesis to how we had played under Hodgson previously, to be fair, we had a much better team under Hodgson at the end of last season. A lot of the older players had left, and a lot of the younger, more dynamic, more technically proficient players were there. Players like Elise, obviously Decore, Gay and Anderson helped as well. And so, yeah, we were playing much, much better football at the end of last season under Hodgson. As I say, easier fixtures, but the way we were winning those games with, brilliant attacking football, and we were just looking like really confident, and everything seemed to be coming together. It was the perfect blend of the kind of usual Hodgson defensive solidity, but with also, for our attacking players, with the freedom to kind of enjoy themselves. And so, having not really decided who Palace were going to go for long term with the manager, it made sense as a kind of stopgap to have another a year of Hodgson, or at least it made sense at the time. Now we're kind of seeing some cracks forming in that plan, because they had a long time to think about who they wanted, 3 months, I think, or something like that, until the end of the season while Hodgson was there, to maybe look at who they might have wanted to be the long-term boss. And maybe they approached people and they weren't ready. I think Graham Potter was mentioned, but he wanted a break from football after the Chelsea horror show, which is fair enough. So possibly they had names and they approached him and couldn't get them. But yeah, the downsides of the Hodgson plan are now showing, which is that tactically he doesn't seem to have much beyond try and be solid and potentially hit them on the break. And that's fine for a while, and you can dig out results. We beat United at Old Trafford. Obviously, United have been not brilliant this season, but we have had some good results this season. But now, particularly with the injuries, which I suppose does offer some mitigation for him, because we've had really bad injuries all season. But now we seem to be struggling. We've lost 4 in 5. Obviously, Decore is potentially out for the rest of the season, and he really is one of our best players. I think he still remains underrated by a lot of fans. Who are neutrals. And so, yeah, I'm not particularly optimistic about the season, and it would be over the top to say the rest of the season is a write-off, but I don't really know what we're going to achieve, because we're going to focus on the league, so we're not going to have a cup run most likely, and I don't think we're going to get relegated. There are going to be 3 teams worse than Palace, especially this season.
Definitely, yeah.
But I really can't see us finishing higher than 14th or 13th, and I don't know if that kind of position, allied with the poor football and the sort of lack of excitement, means that we might start losing some of our better players in the summer. Whereas if as under Vieira, where we finished in around the same place, but just the feel of the club was much different in terms of excitement and ambition and style of football. Obviously, fans and players are more engaged with that, whereas not so much under Hodgson now.
Yeah, That's genuinely really interesting, because I think it was easy at the time. And look, I did it. I was one of these people. It's easy as an outsider when you don't follow the ins and outs of a club week in, week out, and go to the games and get the, you've put it spot on there about the sense of the fans and the feeling of the fans. I always like to ask people about that, you know, how are the fans feeling? Because it's not always as black and white as, oh, we're 8th in the league, so everything's dandy, or we're 16th and everything's terrible. Like you say, there are other things, particularly for match going fans. You know, I know you are get down to Selhurst quite a lot, Maxi, and I think when there are more, it's more to just where you are in the league, right? And I think at the time when Vieira got appointed, I thought that's really exciting. That is really exciting. And I went to a couple of like Palace press conferences, and you know, he's still got that aura. And I know, you know, we've seen that with Frank Lampard and plenty of other players, that aura doesn't win you football games, right? I understand that. But it was like, blimey, this is a real, like, brave, exciting move from Palace to almost like a breakaway from the image you'd picked up over the seasons past. So when it was, you know, and look, if it didn't work out, I've got no problem with that. You know, I sort of always, I find it really annoying when football fans sort of go, you should never have done that. It's like, well, no, like, just, you can, it's brave to try and change the feeling of a club or whatever, or change a manager or change a player or whatever. But if it doesn't work immediately, that doesn't mean it's a failure. You just try again. Like, you just do something a little bit different. And, you know, I say that time and time again with West Ham striker situation. I'd sooner us buy someone and then flop every year than just keep reverting back, then give up and go, oh, we'll play Mikel Antonio for another decade. And I think it's the same, you know, the best example is Joe Hart with Pep Guardiola with Joe Hart and Claudio Bravo. It's like, he knew what he was trying to do. Okay, he didn't get the right person for it with Bravo straight away, so he went again. But ultimately, the plan was correct.
Yeah,
and it just seemed with Palace, I thought, excellent, that's great, that's a good thing for the club and the fans, and you know, try and sort of step up a bit after a few years of solidifying. So then, when you just went back to Hodgson, I know he's probably or is he thought of more sort of fondly at Palace and perhaps he is elsewhere in the Prem. But it just felt like, really? Just like, you've tried once, and it weren't like it was a disaster. It just hasn't.
The first season under Vieira was brilliant.
Yeah, and did it feel like that at the club? Where the fans are, oh, really? Like, come on, there was something going there, and there was something happening at the club again, and now here we are watching us sit in 14th and not really scoring, defending quite well, and it's just back to like.
Yeah, so when Hodgson took over, I think there was a general understanding that he was the best short-term manager to kind of see us through until the rest of the season, just kind of pull us away from the relegation zone and just ensure a nice, safe finish. And so I'd say there was sort of general agreement on that midway towards the end of last season. But in the summer, when he got appointed and extended again, I think then sort of fans thought, well, you know, the first season under Vieira was really good. We let go. I think we released 11 older players, and you know, that was the window we bought a lot of really exciting young players to the club. Gay, Anderson, Elise, and all of those players have rocketed in value and are massive parts of why we're so good now. And you know, we can completely transform the style of play, and it just felt like we were really giving teams a game, and we were there kind of taking the game to them rather than sort of waiting for them to attack and inevitably score. And so, the feeling was just much better. We obviously got to the FA Cup semi as well. And I think we were a bit unlucky because normally when you get to kind of domestic cup semi-finals, there's normally a mid-table Premier League team or maybe even a championship team there. But I think it was just like Chelsea, Liverpool, City. And we got the slightly easier draw with Chelsea, but obviously, lost out on the day. But just generally around the club, the feeling was one of positivity, and you know, the style of play was so proactive and front foot and dynamic and exciting that it as I said previously on this podcast, it felt like a backward step to go back to Hodgson. And possibly the manager that they wanted, I don't know, Graham Potter or Steve Cooper or someone like that, wasn't quite available at the time, and they'll go back in for them in the summer. And I hope they do go for another manager like Vieira, because just the fact that it went a bit stale and, things tailed off before Vieira got sacked, as you say, it doesn't mean that it was the wrong decision. And I think long term, it's more risky not to take a risk on a manager, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If we keep going for the safest option, we are just going to have a bad season in the next 5 years, and we might go down.
And as well, I think, I guess as well, that from the club's point of view, they want to keep the fans engaged, right? Because it's easy to me and you talk about it, a couple of times a season on the podcast or whatever, and it's easy to sort of, as it's going by day to day, you don't really notice it, but all of a sudden, you sort of think, oh, hang on, I've been having the same conversation for 4 years with them. I look back to the dark ages of West Ham, where you have to keep the fans engaged, don't you? Because otherwise it can be, 5 years or whatever, when you're just like, what's different to, with 2023 now? And you go, what's different to 2017? And then when the end of the season comes around, fans start thinking about their season tickets and, do I want to just do this again for another year? Well. Yeah. And I think, of course, mate. Yeah. And I just, it just seemed a bit of a strange one. That we'll get sort of about who would you have then, but before we move on, if it was down to you, because I think Hodgson's deal runs to the end of the season, am I right?
Yeah, 1 year.
Yeah. So assuming that is finally the end of it, and he does hang up the management whistle or boots or whatever you wear as a manager, age 104. Who, if you were in charge, who would you want if you could? Steve Cooper, I like the idea. I don't feel like he's going anywhere at Forest, depending on what happens with them. But who would you like to see in charge at the beginning of next season?
I'd like Graham Potter. I don't know if it's realistic, because I think there will be better teams in for him realistically. But I would like him. I've got no qualms at all about his former Brighton connection.
I was going to ask that,
because Glenn Murray moved to us on a free and scored 30 goals, and we got promoted, and we haven't left since. So I've got no qualms about that, really. And even though we've actually suffered previously, kind of historically, with Palace managers moving from Brighton, Alan Mullery was an absolute disaster, but that's another story for another podcast. I just think he plays the kind of football that would kind of engage and excite the fans. He's obviously good with young players, and I think Palace is quite an attractive project in terms of pretty safe in the Premier League, but also, I don't think we're far off a top 8 team, and that might sound silly given that we might finish 15th this season.
I don't think it does, mate.
When everyone's fit and firing, I think, a new right back, a new left winger, potentially a new striker, we could easily finish 8th. And that's even, despite it feels like a lot of teams now are in that sort of 5th to 9th bracket who are much, much better. West Ham, Villa, obviously Newcastle now kind of Champions League team, but it really feels like that top 8 or kind of qualifying for European football is really competitive now. But I think we're up there with those teams if we make the right additions and keep our players fit. And so I think I hope it would be enough of an attractive project for him. So I think I'd like him potentially.
I like the Steve Cooper one. I was obviously, you sort of answered the question there about whether you care about the Brighton link or not. But look, what's just we do need to move on to the game just quickly. What's life like post Wilf? He's obviously sort of doing okay at Galatasaray, to be fair. Scored the goal against Man United, obviously, which was a nice little tale. But that again, that just sort of seemed to symbolise what Palace, I don't know, what Palace represented for me, almost like that Groundhog Day, season in, season out, where we'd go through, every single transfer window, and you'd read 50 stories about potential locations for Wilfried Zaha, and lo and behold, at the end of the window, he's still there. And even that, going to Galatasaray, I understand he wants to play Champions League. That just felt like a Oh, even that seemed to sort of end with a whimper. What did you feel about that move, and how was it like post Wilf, I suppose?
Yeah, I was obviously distraught to see him go because he's, potentially
Were
Palace's
you
best
really?
ever player. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sort of emotionally like that's a kind of hard decision. With my head, I understand that offering someone who's into their 30s and with an increasing kind of injury history 200 grand a week for 3 or 4 years potentially, maybe not it's not a logical decision, and it's not the decision you'd make for, like, kind of in the cold light of day if you're looking at the numbers on paper. But then, Wolf has never been that kind of player, and obviously being our best ever player and that kind of thing, there were times, even in his last season, where he would just drag us through games and kind of create something with a moment of magic. And so I understand why we had offered him the deal that we had, but fair play to him. Obviously he's going to play Champions League football, and scoring against United was brilliant. I'm a little bit disappointed he didn't go to a better team than Galatasaray, because it feels like he's good enough to play for a better team than Galatasaray. But I suppose it was like the mixture of a new country, and like he's got the chance of winning domestic trophies in Turkey, which if he goes to, I don't know, Dortmund or somewhere else like that, maybe not so realistic. So yeah, it was a shame to lose him, but we seem to have adapted okay without him. We just haven't really replaced him on the left wing. Mateus França is obviously quite a promising young player, the Brazilian, but he's not going to be ready for the Premier League for potentially even beyond the start of next season, because he's so raw. He's only ever played mostly as a sub for Flamengo in the Brazilian league. And obviously in Brazil, you play against a lot of like local kind of regional teams who are not the same level, as opposed to like constant high level opposition. So he's a project player. He's going to be a while. And for the moment, it just seems like we're stuck with Jeff Schlupp and Jordan Ayew out of position on the left wing. And that's not particularly inspiring, but it does offer the opportunity for the likes of Eze and Elise, who kind of always played a little bit second fiddle to Zaha, to really step up and be the main man. And towards the end of last season, Eze in particular was that man. And then against Luton, I don't know if you've seen the Elise goal, one of the goals of the season, unbelievable. And that was such a weird thing to see, because it reminded me of watching Zaha, because we'd obviously just conceded against Luton away.
I see it's still Zaha, troubling you, the fact that happened.
It's too soon. And even in the future podcast, it's still going to be too soon. Like,
never ever talk to me about losing to Luton again, Will. That's what you're saying.
But like when we were in trouble before, Zaha would just like demand the ball immediately and just do something with it, and somehow he'd find a way of assisting or scoring, whatever the match situation or whoever was opposite him. He would always do something. And Elise just got the ball with his back to goal on the halfway line, with a defender right up behind him, and just somehow like manufactured a way to score. And I was like, that's so Zaha to do something like that. And so it's obviously such a shame, because Elise's been out the whole season. Eze's been out for a lot of the season, and we finally had them on the same pitch together. First half, we looked pretty good, all over Luton, obviously. And then we lose Eze and Doucouré in quick succession. And both of them are going to be, not short-term injuries, particularly Doucouré. But it's okay losing Zaha, because, as I say, it lets Eze and Elise kind of step up a little bit. But we need a left winger. We don't really have a natural one. And I think that is the position, along with right back, because we've got two 39-year-olds still playing there. I just feel like Joel Ward is like one of the three certainties in life. We're just going to be playing in 2000.
Death, taxes, and Joel Ward.
A 158-year-old Joel Ward is just going to be like trudging after.
Exactly. Just Brian and Buemo leaving him in his wake.
That's the memory I have of Wardy now. And I love Joel Ward. He's a real like club legend, and he's going to get his testimonial hopefully. But I mean, realistically, he just doesn't have the pace anymore. I think right back and left winger as well. We need to to strengthen.
Yeah. Mate, I totally know what you mean, right? And I felt the same way about Antonio. I go on about him a lot on this podcast, and I think, I don't know, but I think there is an element. I certainly feel like when I'm going to talk about it again, I'm like, oh, here we go, Groundhog Day, and I'm like, well, hang on a minute, it's not my fault. It's not my fault West Ham haven't been able to sign an adequate replacement to 34-year-old right back Mikel Antonio. So I'm gonna keep on moaning about it. But there is just that sense you get when the team or the club, whatever it is, like outgrow a player, isn't there? And all of a sudden you're like, what are you still doing here? And I think it's just about happening with Aaron Cresswell. Like he sort of shifted from a starter to a decent backup. But again, like a genuinely club legend. Yeah, Fabianski was probably, I would have backed him to have another year at least at the top level, but Areola would have gone, so it's better for the club long term. But Antonio, it's just like, the bloke's 34. Like, most like clubs in the Premier League are playing strikers who are 80 years younger than him, like easy. And so I don't totally know what you mean about Joel Ward. Look, Maxie, let's talk a bit more about current form. I've really enjoyed sort of getting the overall picture from you on Palace at the moment. Like you said, 4 defeats out your last 5, only 1 win in 6 games. And yeah, from your point of view, some of those games as well, you've played Forest, Everton, Luton and Burnley. I think Burnley was your only win. Obviously, we won at Turf Moor at the weekend, made a bit harder work of it than you did, to be fair. I think you played well. I watched a lot of that game. And yeah, you've obviously the news coming out yesterday / this morning. Check the Corey looks like he's going to be out for around 6 months, which could keep him out for the whole year, or you might get him back for the last few games if you're lucky. Eze looks like his is about 3 to 4 weeks, I think I read. So maybe he's back for the Christmas period, some of those games. What's going on at the moment then, form wise and injury wise? What's happening? What'd you put that all down to?
Yeah, the injuries is an interesting one because from what I understand, Vieira was a real workhorse in terms of basically always double training sessions. And it felt like we were really, really fit as a fit team under Vieira. And so that made it easier. Obviously, Conor Gallagher helped because he's got iron lungs. But it felt like the whole team were really fit in terms of pressing, and we didn't concede so many last-minute goals, which has been a bit of a theme on the Palace recently. And Hodgson kind of famously takes a bit of a back foot approach, and sort of training is a bit more enjoyable and fun and relaxed, which is fine for player morale, but also you kind of need someone with the stick a little bit to kind of give players a kick up the backside when it comes to that kind of, real kind of physical training. And so, yeah, I think maybe that could be a factor behind why I've had so many injuries. It feels like we've had a lot of hamstrings as well, but that could just be a symptom of the fixture schedule, which is just ridiculous. As I'm from last season playing in Europe as well. It's just,
this year,
it's just so difficult. And so, the injuries, to be honest, the injuries were largely behind us. And so at the weekend, finally had Eze back, finally had Elise back. And the only injuries we had were Henderson, who's our backup goalie, and like Tompkins and I think one other. And so we were thinking, right, we're back to almost full strength, basically. And then obviously to lose our 2 key players within 5 minutes. And literally neither of them were to do with a tackle. They just both went down with no one around them. It's just really disappointing. But as I say, while the injuries do offer mitigation, we haven't played well enough. Like Everton at home, which I went to, I would say we deserved to win that game, and we were the better team. But you just can't concede 3 goals at home to Sean Dyche's Everton, and expect to win. Like, you can't. And yeah, I guess every fan could say this. We maybe haven't quite had the rub of the green with VAR decisions. Wolves seem to be worse off than that with us. But yeah, we haven't played well enough, and particularly the last couple of games, what's been concerning is the lack of defensive solidity. Because however bad we look in attack under Hodgson, what you can always fall back on is that you tend to only concede, 0 or 1 goals, and you always have a chance of getting a result if you only concede none or 1. Whereas in this Everton, we looked all over the place. I think that was because Doucouré was missing, because he makes such a massive difference to us defensively in terms of anticipating and intercepting and snuffing things out before they get to the stage where it's a big chance. But against Everton, we just look really open at the back, and then obviously against Luton, to be fair, our record from corners this season has been incredible. Unlike last season, where we conceded 3 in the same game at Selhurst against West Ham. This season, the Athletic Crystal Palace writer Matt Woosnam actually wrote an article about how we'd only conceded 1 goal or 2 goals. I think it was 1 goal in 85 corners, and we were like joint top with Tottenham for conceding the fewest from corners. Luton obviously score a scrappy, rubbish goal from a corner, which is fine. It happens. Teams concede from corners, but particularly the second goal, I don't know if you've seen it, the Jacob Brown goal, it just felt like a really bad goal to concede defensively. There were like 4 players around the man in midfield who then passed out to Ogbene, which meant that Ogbene was completely free. He's obviously their danger man in attack. And then the cross comes in, good cross, corridor uncertainty, but Anderson is capable of clearing that so easily.
Yeah.
And there's just a moment of doubt and uncertainty, and they just leave it. You can never leave a cross going across your box. Just get it out, put it out for a throw, put it out for a corner. Yeah. Just poor defensively, and that's kind of uncharacteristic of Palace and Palace under Hodgson especially. That's kind of what makes me worried, because obviously West Ham have got very capable technical attackers. I'm not sure if Bowen's going to be back, but he's obviously class. Kudus has hit the ground running. Paquetà's can pick up pass as well. So I'm not particularly optimistic just based on that, because I feel like we're going to concede 2, and we're going to score 3.
It's interesting because we can't keep a clean sheet for love nor money, at all. But just looking at your stats, and you seem quite defensively resolute. If Bowen isn't back, and it means Danny Ings starts up front again, and I know can be one for a bit of hyperbole every now and then, but I keep saying he should never play for our club again. He is just nowhere near the standard required. His confidence looks shot. He doesn't look like he cares. He's not bothered. He doesn't fit in the system. It's generally a disgrace every time he pulls on a shirt. Same again at Burnley at the weekend. Danny Ings. So if Danny, if he plays up front, we'll offer absolutely nothing for every single minute he's on the pitch. If Bowen is back, I fancy us a little bit more. But this game could not scream 1-1 at me anymore if it tried. It just feels like we can't ever keep a clean sheet. It doesn't matter who we play. So we will concede 1. And I just feel like we're not offering much in attack at the moment. And even if your defence is a little bit weepy, we're certainly not going to score any more than 1 either, I don't think. So how do you see it playing out then, Maxi? And then give us a score prediction before we let you go.
All right. I will say, reluctantly, 2-1 West Ham, because I just feel like with Doucouré gone, with Eze gone, you don't lose much defensively. Obviously, we look much blunter in attack. We still have Elise, so we have a bit of goal threat. And as you say, West Ham have been conceding, which questions my decision to put Areola in goal in my FPL team. Absolutely.
Yeah, same.
Taking out ASAP. But I can see us scoring, but I can't see us winning. I just think the loss of Doucouré defensively is so massive. And Will Hughes is okay. He's technically pretty good, but physically he's not there. And when you're playing a midfield with the quality of Alvarez, Ward-Prowse, Souček as well, I can just see us getting kind of physically dominated. Lerma's great, but Hughes is physically he's not quite there, and obviously not at the same level as Doucouré. So I think we'll struggle, and I'm going to say narrow 2-1 defeat.
2-1 to West Ham. Well, I'm not. It just always makes me nervous when opposition fans come on and predict West Ham are going to win, because I rarely can with any conviction. So it always makes me nervous. Yeah, this game just absolutely screams 1-1 for me. I can't. I can just see it being one of those where both sets of fans go away reasonably unhappy on a freezing cold Sunday in East London, just going, what's the point? Like, what a load of rubbish that was. But yeah, I mean, I feel it's going to be one of them. West Ham are sort of in a little bit of a sort of, we've kind of this season, some of the wins we have got are when you don't necessarily, like Burnley, you don't necessarily come away really proud of your team going, oh, that was great. So I don't know, it would absolutely not surprise me. I don't think either team is going to perform really well. It would absolutely not surprise me if you nicked a 1-0 or a 2-1 or something like that, or if we did. But I just think whatever happens, neither set of fans is going to go away going, oh, what a performance there. Like, really good game of football. Yeah. What performance from the boys. It's just not going to happen. But listen, Max, it's been absolutely brilliant having you on the show. I've sort of, proper enjoyed the conversation and probably rattled on a little bit longer than we usually do, because I've enjoyed it so much. It's been great having you on the show, and you certainly know your things, football and Palace in particular. That's this game Sunday afternoon, London Stadium, West Ham v Palace. After, of course, we go to Bakatopola in the Europa League on Thursday. Maxi says 2-1 to West Ham. I'm having 1-1. I think that's about the best we can possibly hope for. I think Jonesy has been a bit confident and gone for a 2-1 West Ham as well. But I think one thing we can be sure of is that it's not going to be a Rolls-Royce performance from either team. Max Matthews from The Athletic, their sports journalist and huge Crystal Palace fan, chatting to me, Will Pugh, on the Opposition View on the We Are West Ham podcast. Don't forget to follow us and subscribe on YouTube and the podcast in all the usual places. Leave us 5 stars, say some nice things, say some mean things if you want, just as long as you put 5 stars. Not really too bothered. Get us on the socials, Twitter at @WeAre_West Ham, We Are West Ham Pod. On Instagram, buy us a pint if you want at buymeacoffee.com/We Are West Ham. That's it from me and Jonesy for another week. We'll chat to you after the Palace game early next week. It'll be Tuesday or Wednesday the first podcast comes out, but 2 games coming up. By the time you hear this, we'll have played Bakatopola, Palace at home on Sunday to carry on our run towards the Europa League places again, hopefully in the Prem this season. Thanks for listening, everyone. Up the Hammers, West Ham are massive, and we'll speak to you next week.